Welcome to week 13. Man, it's getting late in the season already. It feels like just yesterday it was week one. We were all naive, and now we're 13 weeks in, and we're going to be talking about guys like Kenneth Dixon this week. So, how things have changed in terms of the landscape. But this video, we're going to be focusing on quarterbacks. I'm here with Jim McCormick. Jim, how was last week for you?
It was okay. It was like a dart throw kind of week, wasn't it? I mean, it seems like a lot of the low dollar guys hit, and it wasn't great for chalk, but it was interesting. I also think it's always a strange week when you have the Thanksgiving games, consolidating that much of the NFL into one day. But yeah, it was interesting, and like you said, the landscape's a lot different these days than it was. We're getting into that era of the season where guys like Dixon and we're dealing with kind of new names a little bit more than we were used to.
Exactly. Well, let me go ahead and pull this up because we want to talk about this first. The big game, 51. You can win free tickets on rotocurve.com. Check out rotocurve.com/big-game. It's a 4-night trip to Houston, beginning of February, like it always is. You get 2 tickets to the big game February 5th, upgraded lower level end zone seats, VIP tickets to the Antonio Brown celebrity game. Of course, you got to love seeing Antonio Brown, $800 in airfare credit, all you can eat tailgate, and much, much more. Rotocurve.com/big game. Go ahead and check that one out. Jim, let's talk quarterbacks this week. And I just want to start this one off by saying that once again, I like to have a hard and fast rule. We discuss it every week that I like to go cheap at quarterback,
Right.
but I don't see how you fade Drew Brees in cash games this week. I think you're playing from behind if you decide to do that. I mean, this game, I think the over-under is 52.5, but
53 and a
I mean,
half,
I've been
yeah.
talking about it. Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about it all week. This has all the makings of like that Giants Saints game last year. I mean, where there were 13 combined touchdowns. I mean, they were both bordering on 500. I just think this is the absolute shootout game of not only the week but of the year. I mean, you look at this Lions team that's allowed the least fantasy points to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. I think people are going to fall for that. I mean, they faced the Vikings twice. They faced Jacksonville. They faced Brock Osweiler. So they faced a bunch of bums. I mean, this overall
Right.
sample size is
Skewed.
superior. Exactly. And the only time Drew Brees hasn't thrown for 303 touchdowns at home this year was against the Seahawks. So
And he still had 21 fantasy points. So
so I think that Drew Brees is an absolute must-use in cash and maybe even all formats. I'm considering this week not even using another quarterback. So I'll lead you in with that
right.
thought, and you can go from there.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I wrote Best Buys this week, the NFL DFS Best Buys for ESPN, filling some big shoes, stepping in for Al Zeidenfeld. I didn't win a million yet, but it's coming. But and then also on my rosters piece here for RotoCurve, Drew Brees led the way. I don't need to pick up too much, analytically what you're saying. It's all true. New Orleans averages 3.04 points per drive at home. Now, points per drive isn't a common stat that we're used to knowing. So, 3 points, what does that mean? Well, the average team averages 2.02 points. So 3-2. It's a 50.5%, upgrade over the average NFL offense at home, which is ridiculous. Like you said, the point total's at 53.5. It's not a week with a bunch of gaudy point totals. I think one of the second or third best point totals on Monday night. So if you're in a tournament that doesn't include Monday, the differentiation factor for this game in the Superdome is really big. Also, the Lions on the road are a different thing. A lot of these games you're talking about have been at home, about their productivity defensively. And again, also against bad quarterbacks. But they've allowed the fourth most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks on DraftKings and the fourth most points per drive on the road. And also they have the lowest pressure rate. They've only pressured opposing quarterbacks 19.6% of dropbacks, the lowest in the league. Drew Brees, I think, has the second lowest pressure rate in the league. So everything lines up here. He's averaged 31 points on DraftKings at home this year, and that includes the 21-point game against the Seahawks. So if 21 points is your outlier, then you're amazing, right? Because if that's what we're establishing as kind of your floor so far for the season, yeah, I mean, Also, the other thing too is in traditional fantasy, even DFS fantasy, Drew Brees is averaging what Cam Newton averaged last year, and he still has Tampa twice. He still has this Detroit team. So this could be like, an historically good fantasy year that we're just not kind of recognizing because we kind of take for granted this Drew Brees thing, right? I think the other name people are going to talk about in cash is Colin Kaepernick. It's almost like the market took like a couple of weeks to really even believe that this was happening because he's been doing this for a month now. And it's obviously really all about the legs. To talk about Cam Newton, this is a guy who is kind of doing that level of production, not the touchdowns. He only, I think, has one rushing touchdown, but it's 62 rushing yards a game since he became a starter, which is amazing. He has 102 more rushing yards than any other quarterback since week 6. To put it in real perspective, he's 16th in the NFL in rushing since he became a starter. That's like including running backs. He's got more rushing yards than Todd Gurley, among many others. But I just mentioned that because that's a 20-touch back, and he's rushing for more yardage than him. So, yeah, he's a top 6-7 quarterback over the last 6 weeks. And you get against this downtrodden Chicago team. You're familiar with this team, obviously. They're missing Trevathan and Freeman. They're inside linebackers. They're probably their best tacklers.
Right.
And, and the secondary is not playmaking. They're 28th in interception rate. They're 24th in pressure rate as a defense, as a pass rush. So, at some point you would think it's going to come back to earth, but it's really just about opportunity. He's running the ball 8 times a game. And if he's going to average 7+ or break off 1 or 2 runs a game, yeah, you're going to get that 7 yards per clip, and you're going to end up with 55, 60 rushing yards, and there's your floor. So I don't know what you think about the Kaepernick thing. I know the price is rising, but I do agree with you that like Breeze should just be a staple of your cash lineups. But, I can see the agenda to save, on Kaepernick. I really can't see much else. Tyrod Taylor is interesting, but I might have to convert him into a tournament guy.
Yeah, I think the reason people are so off Kaepernick is because they don't like him as a person. And we haven't really seen anything like this in the NFL where, like, Adrian Peterson, he did his, one thing that pissed people off, which was really bad. I mean, he beat his kid, but when he came back, like, there wasn't ongoing pissing people off when he got back. Like, Kaepernick says something every week, and if you don't agree with him, it's really turning you off to him. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing a lot of people, just not want to use him, whether it's right or wrong. But I agree with you. I mean, he has been showing it for a while now.
They love Tyreek Hill. It's like,
right. It doesn't make any sense.
I mean,
false equivalencies are definitely a thing.
Exactly.
Here.
Exactly.
Guys who are violent to their significant others definitely should be looked down upon more than someone just talking. But, this is the America we live in.
Exactly.
So people,
we can focus on the football part of it, which is what we're doing, right? So,
right. Yeah, and Kaepernick has been, Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You had your take on Kaepernick. You're the Chicago guy. What do you think? How do you think this Bears team handles? It almost seems like not a shootout, but yeah, in some sense, there's no defense in this game, right? And
agreed. I don't think the Bears have what it takes left to contain him. I think the rushing is going to be, why you roster him. So I think if you were going a different route than Breeze, do it. But Breeze is kind of the guy that, like, at the beginning of the week, sometimes I'll write down guys like, don't fade him, regardless of what you think, changes the rest of the week.
Right.
And he's that guy this week. It's like, if you start thinking Kaepernick instead and Drew Brees goes for 35 to 40 and Kaepernick doesn't, you just are like, why did I overthink it? So I don't want to go there if at all possible.
I completely understand that. Yeah. So do you want to jump into tournament guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think the logical place to start in tournament is Matthew Stafford on the other side of Drew Brees in that same game. I mean, you talk about a team that Colin Kaepernick torched via the air, this Saints team. Then obviously we think Matt Stafford can do it. Delvin Breaux's a pretty good corner, but besides that, I mean, there's not a whole lot holding me back. I mean, we'll get to it in running backs. I think Theo Riddick is in a fantastic spot this week.
It is.
And if he breaks off a long one, it's most likely going to be in the passing game since the Saints struggle to cover opposing backs. So Stafford can get some easy yardage. We know he's the record holder for yardage through his first 100 games. So, I mean, this just screams he's going to be at an easy 300 yards. The question is how many touchdowns. And if it's a shootout like we think it's going to be, I mean, that number could reach 4 or 5 very easily. So I think Stafford's the place that I'm starting in tournaments. Besides that, I'm pretty much on a lot of the top guys this week. I mean, Aaron Rodgers against Houston, just because he basically uses the short passing game as the rushing game. And I like Matt Ryan because we'll get to it in wide receivers. I really like his pair of wideouts. And I think Russell Wilson is the only other guy that I liked against Carolina. I like the spot for Jimmy Graham. I like the spot for Doug Baldwin. You know, Carolina as a whole, just not the same team this year. So when I'm looking in tournaments, it's really, I'm not messing around with the mid tier this week. There are so many low totals that Baltimore, Miami, that Jacksonville, Denver, where, again, I just think you're playing from behind if you roster these guys.
You're hoping for something unique to happen, right?
Exactly. You're hoping for 5 touchdowns in a game where it's very unlikely, where this just seems like a conducive environment for everyone. So that's what I got for tournaments. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of those. I agree with Rodgers. Definitely guy. Stafford, of course, because it's not that much of a discount from Breeze, but in tournaments, it's just another way to get differentiation. And there is savings, of course. So it's enough to say that I could, make a difference at a skill position with that money. I don't think the crowd will be on him because I think they think the Giants are good defensively, which they have been in some sense. But you just talked about the kind of stretch that Detroit's had. Well, New York's had a pretty sweet stretch here too of opponents. If you go through it, they haven't really knocked off any dominant offenses here. Even in the games that they've played, say with the Redskins earlier this year, they were shootouts. And taking down my Eagles isn't as impressive as it maybe seemed in the first month of the season because, since week 5, the Eagles are like 25th in points per drive. And Wentz is a real rookie again. But in any case, Ben Roethlisberger is what I'm coming to. He's almost the same amount of money as Breeze, so no way in cash. But the thing is, he's almost Breeze-like. They're like the Steelers are like the Saints of the AFC. He's averaged 337 yards and 3.75 touchdowns at home this year. And the Giants are good. They have a good pass rush, but they really go as their pass rush goes. So if in some way the Steelers are able to protect Roethlisberger, I think he does have a big day. And I think the point total supports it. It's one of the few point totals that's well over, that's approaching 50. They're home favorites, and it's really just the skill set of the guys he has. You talked about the Riddick, potential. Well, we have a guy. If you're not going to pay up for Le'Veon Bell, which we can talk about obviously in the running back section, but here's a guy he's got 57 catches. Le'Veon Bell since week 4. Antonio Brown's got 58. I mean, this is so what I mean by this is that it's such a concentrated offense to their 2 best players that any of the playmaking that's going to happen almost seems like it's going to come from the pass. So, yeah, it's a guy that I don't mind in tournaments. I don't think the crowd will be on Ben is the thing. I think people are kind of a little bit averse to this because of what the Giants have been doing. I could be wrong. I could be reading the marketing correctly, but I think people are either going to go to pay down or to Breeze. And speaking of paying down, I know it's kind of crazy to trust Matt Barkley, but in a tournament, you don't have to trust him too much. You're just hoping. And more importantly, he's only 5,000 on DraftKings, 6,000 on FanDuel. Repaying value is not difficult. If you're just looking for 3 to 4 times value, you're going to get that, I think, from Barkley. And the thing is, he dropped back 54 times last week. And I know there was a lot of drops. There's a lot of production left on the field for the Bears. So it's just, I know this San Francisco defense is as bad as advertised. They really are. They've allowed the most points per drive since week 2. If you take out that Rams game, and they have no pass rush, they have no mobility in the linebacking core. So yeah, I think Barkley could drop back at least 45 times again, and 300 and kind of one of these Brian Hoyer games. 302 at a really cheap price.
Yeah, I think there's virtually no chance that it's a low-scoring week. So you're going to want 28 fantasy points from your quarterback at the very least, even if you spend down. So just keep that in mind.
It's tough to stomach that, right, with Barkley.
Yeah, so if you're spending down, you need, 300 and a few touchdowns from Barkley. If you think you're getting that, definitely do it. If you think it's a possibility, which, I mean, he showed last week it was, and he did it with 10 drops from his receivers. I mean, he was what,
And against
54% completion?
a solid enough defense. I mean, like we know Tennessee's secondary is not very good, but they do have a pass rush. So yeah, I agree. It's definitely not a high floor situation. He's Matt Barkley still, but
Yeah,
there's
if you're using him, it's for his outlier possibility.
right, and the fact that you can then really load up on skill players. I guess I am going to mention Tyrod Taylor just because I might actually be more comfortable paying up a little bit more for him, especially on DraftKings. On FanDuel, his price is pretty commensurate with the rest of his peers, but like he's not that much different than Kaepernick, for example, on FanDuel. But he's a pretty good discount from most players on DraftKings. And the thing with him is just that he's averaged 45 yards on the ground over the last 6 weeks, second only to Kaepernick. He's has 15.8 fantasy points in every single game over the last 10 starts. The only outlier was that when he had against the Bengals and he had a rushing touchdown called back. It's almost like I'm making an argument for him in cash in some ways. But what I think the ceiling comes from is this Raiders team. They engage in shootouts. I know Khalil Mack's playing well, but they're still 10th lowest in pressure rate. So there's something there. I know Sammy Watkins is banged up again here, but Taylor's been putting up big games even without him. So something about this says to me that they're going to have to, keep pace with the Raiders here. So it could be interesting. But again, I don't trust him enough in cash, and I'd only want a few shares of him in tournaments.
There you go. That will do it for us in terms of quarterbacks this week. I want to remind you the Big Game 51, sponsored by RotoCurve. You can win free tickets to it, plus fan experience events. Again, that's a 4-night trip, 2 tickets to the Big Game, upgraded lower level seats, VIP tickets to the Antonio Brown celeb game, $800 in airfare, all you can eat tailgate, and much, much more. Rotocurve.com/big-game. Stay tuned as Jim and I will now be talking running backs for week 13.